All right, hey, welcome back to Boys Against NATO. Today we have a very special video for you, just like always, all right? But before we get into that, I want to go ahead and give a shout out to a couple different companies. Okay, one, I want to give a shout out to our camera guy, Baron the Outlaw. That guy is a fucking savage, okay? This guy does a lot of great work for a lot of people. He's not going to do free work because it does not demand that. It demands a good amount of dollar, but it is well worth spent, and this guy is fucking awesome. Then we're also going to give a shout out to TOC Kydex. All right, so use code THEBOYS, all caps, no spaces. We have a mag pouch from them and a couple other things that we're going to start working on, and you'll see that later on. Those guys are pretty dope. That guy, he is all about customer feedback. So if you order something from him and you have some feedback, give it to him. The next one, Javelin Concepts. Javelin Concepts, that is the best soft goods that I have as a recommendation, me personally. 1/3 of Boys Against NATO in terms of plate carriers, belts, pouches, stuff like that. You should definitely check them out. So all same code, the boys, all caps, no spaces, and you will get a nice little help on your order there. So have a good one with that. This is the Elftmann Pro component, which for all you FUDs out there, it is unloaded, but it was sent to us for T&E. I've got a connection over there at Elftmann. Pretty cool guy, actually a really cool guy. He's just like TOC, very much about feedback. When he sent it to us, he said, hey, don't bite your tongue. Go ahead and run the hell out of it and let us know what you think. So that gave me a lot of inspired confidence, and I'm ready to relay that to y'all. But essentially, that is the relationship between me and Elftmann. I don't know if the owner knows who we are, probably not, but the guy that we've been dealing with, he's a great guy, really cares about y'all as the consumer and really cares about the product. So excited to review this, not just for the fact that it was sent to us, but excited to review it for y'all, the customer, the consumer, someone who might be putting this in a heavy use rifle. So excited for that. All right, so to keep it in traditional fashion, we're going to get into the why to the Elftmann, right? I've actually known about them for a while. They're a little bit more known for drop-in triggers rather than component triggers. And for y'all that don't know the difference, a drop-in is going to come like a cassette, if you ever heard cassette trigger. So that would be something like Rise 140s or CMC triggers, stuff like that. And then a component is going to be what you're typically used to with things like, you know, your BCM or your Colt or what you were issued, or the PSA that's guaranteed to break within a magazine. No, I'm not smiling. But anyway, so that's going to, or Geisley, right? That's going to be what a component is. And that's what this trigger is. So when they hit me up about that, I was extremely excited, because the fact that in my eyes, a component trigger is what you should be looking for when it comes to a heavy use rifle. Something that's going to get dirty, something that's going to need to ignite all primers, right? Whether that be European primers, military primers, right off the shelf at Academy type stuff, you know, it doesn't matter. It should be able to just handle any condition you're putting it through, because if your trigger can't work, you're gonna have some problems, right? So the lower isn't very interesting until you start toying with the trigger, and that's why I was very excited, because I was like, okay, let's see what we can do with it, right? And we've done some shit to it. So all right, so first we're gonna get into the trigger shoe itself. Okay, you have a couple different options with this. You can get a standard curved, or you can get the flat. I prefer the flat, right? So what happens is, whenever you have a flat, I already showed you it's not chambered, so stop crying. But whenever you get a flat trigger, right, just to show you it works on safe, you can get lower on it. Okay, this isn't a huge deal to some people, and we've got multiple triggers in the project that are actually a standard curved shoe, and they work just fine. I run those with no issue, and neither do the other 2/3 of the guys. But whenever you have a flat trigger, you can get lower on it. So this advertised pull weight is about 4.5 pounds. The lower I can get on it, the less it feels like 4.5 pounds. Does that make sense? So I do like the flat. Plus, it does look cool. I mean, that's subjective, right? But what you're going to see also, whenever you get a close-up of it, you have these little raised ridges, right? Almost like I don't know, herpes or something, and it looks really nice, okay? It doesn't do anything functionally, but it does let you know that the machining is on point, because when you look at these, it's almost like there's no imperfections, okay? So if there's something that's gonna establish confidence in a product, it's whenever you start looking at it at first before you even be able to use it, and you're gonna be able to tell, okay, what's the machining look like? What's the quality of production look like? And whenever you're looking at the trigger shoe, you're looking at the front of the trigger shoe where the raised edges are, you can tell it seems like a quality trigger, okay? There we go. All right. All right, we're gonna go ahead and move into the pull weight, okay? Obviously, as I already said, I like a flat trigger. When it comes to the booty, I like a little bit of a curve, okay? But when it comes to the trigger, I like flat. So essentially, when it comes to pull weights, you've got triggers that can go all the way down to, 2 pounds, 2.5. You got triggers that if you're used to bullpups, they can go all the way up to 100. But when it comes to a duty use trigger, 4.5, which is advertised for this Elftmann, I don't have a problem with. Reason being, you start getting that adrenaline dump. You start getting, into a point where you're making mistakes, which will happen. Everybody makes mistakes. You want a trigger that isn't so light that it's going to create a problem in a situation, but you want a trigger that's lighter than what came on your rifle, because otherwise, what's the point of getting a new trigger, right? Spending the money. The 4.5 is good for me because it lightens it up just a little bit to the points where it's faster on a cadence. It's smoother, X, Y, and Z, but it's not so light that I feel like I should be doing 1,000-yard competitions like Scott Peterson. Shout out that dude. So there is that. I do like the 4.5. It's not too heavy, it's not too light. So not to make it too complicated, there is that. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and move into the internals here. Obviously, when you look on the inside, you're gonna have some little design differences, right? So the hammer is going to look a little different than a traditional hammer that's going to come on your Colt, right? Or on your BCM or Daniel Defense, Geisley, X, Y, and Z. But it's going to look a little bit different, but it's still a separate hammer versus a separate trigger shoe and all the other things. So it's still a component. And the machining looks great on it. Just like how I mentioned on the trigger shoe, the machining looks great on all these things. Now, I want to hit on two things that are going to be different on the internals. One, you have bearings, okay? So we'll get into why those kind of play a factor here in a little bit, but essentially you have bearings that the trigger pins go into, and the bearings are going to make things a little bit smoother. They're going to roll better. They actually feel better. You can actually feel the difference when you're using this trigger. Now, when you see it, you're not going to notice, what the hell are those shiny silver things? Monkey, make me want to grab, right? That's what you're going to think. But essentially, those do serve a purpose, and we'll get into that later. The other thing is, a lot of times with aftermarket triggers, especially cassette triggers, you have springs that are a little bit underpowered, so you have a problem with hitting primers, stuff like that. This has full powered springs, just like a Geisley, just like a LaRue MBT, just like anything. You're not going to have any problems igniting primers with this, so that is a plus. This is an aftermarket trigger that is going to be just as durable, just as reliable as any other standard component trigger and any other standard, high quality trigger like a Geisley, if that makes sense. All right, so onto the roller bearings. This is going to take me down a little bit of a rabbit hole because it's kind of proprietary to how this trigger works. You've got these roller bearings, all right? And the way that they work, in theory, and according to Elftmann, in which I can clarify, it does actually translate to when you're using this trigger. They create a tighter lockup with the trigger, so there's no movement left to right, okay? Not really a big deal. Most triggers, they don't really have a lot of movement anyway, left to right, like the actual trigger, you can wiggle it. But it does just make it that much more tight, and the way that the roller bearings work, they just make things a little bit smoother. They make things a little bit tighter, a little bit, if you could just picture taking a glass marble and then just polishing it, right? Rather than just the glass marble itself. Like, that's the kind of what the roller bearings do to your actual end experience with pulling the trigger. So the problem, though, is you got these pins, right? And I'll walk up here. My cameraman's going to molest me and put me in the right spot, so excuse me, y'all. You got these trigger pins. They look like anti-rotational pins, but they're not. They are anti-walk pins, but that is specifically because of the fact, if I keep moving, it's because I'm trying to be unmolested. But you've got these pins, right? So essentially they look like anti-rotational and anti-walk pins, but really they're just anti-walk pins. The point of the bearings is the fact that they still allow that rotation on the inside of the trigger like a traditional trigger is supposed to allow. So you do get the negatives in the sense that, hey, these pins are a little bit more proprietary rather than standard pins, but you do get the benefit of the rotation on the inside like the original trigger was designed to have, so that way you don't have durability issues over high round counts. And I'll get a little bit more into how I feel about that a little bit later, but that is essentially a byproduct of how those, what do you call them, the bearings work, okay? So I know that that's a little bit confusing, but it will make sense at the end. They are a benefit and they're a con subjectively to some people. All right, so the way that I feel about the pins, okay, we just kind of went over that. The way I feel about the pins, I would 100% be very happy if Elftmann can find a way to still incorporate the roller bearings that are on the inside that the pins go into, while still taking advantage of standardized trigger pins. Even though that they don't have the negatives of anti-rotational pins, they still do retain the negatives of an anti-walk pin. And what that means is, which I think some people overblow, and we'll get into that, but that does mean that it's just another layer of complexity for someone that's going to be putting this on a hard use rifle. So if I'm in an environment like so, around me, just ran into some shit, had an orgy in the desert, sand's all in my trigger, guess what? I might have to kind of take it out, kind of mess with it, kind of wipe it down, stuff like that. In order to do that with this trigger, I'm going to have essentially the correct size Allen key or Allen head or whatever all you Harbor Freight people like to go buy to get this trigger out and field service it. Now, do I think that is the biggest deal, especially for things like pop primers? No. Here's why. If I'm in engagement, right here, right now, I'm engaged from over that way, and he has friends, okay? If I have a pop primer and I have to break my rifle down shotgun style, okay, to take out my trigger group, I'm gonna die before I get the chance to get that trigger out, put it back in, fix what the issue is, yada, 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 okay? I'm gonna have to transition to another rifle, another pistol, something. So I do think that the issue is a little bit overblown with these specifically because they're not anti-rotational, but I do understand the hesitancy to not fully commit because of the fact that it is just another layer of complexity. Again, I do think it's a little overblown because all you got to do is carry the right tool with you, okay? But I do understand the people being reserved on that issue. So there's that. On a track record, how did it perform? The track record is great. Okay, so we put about 1,700 to 2,000 rounds within a month time span. So that's 3 to 4 range trips that we had. To some people, that's a lot of rounds, right? And to others, that's like, hey, dude, I did that one day last week off my back porch or at a class last week, whatever, right? That's up to you to determine how many rounds we put through it and if it's worth buying or not, and if that's a objective, durable data point for you, okay? But to us, that was enough to establish how's this trigger going to continue to work. And of course, if anything changes, we will update you. But 1,700, 2,000 rounds within 3-4 range trips in a month time frame, we felt it was pretty good. Everything from M193, M855, Wolf, Tula. There was a couple different hand loads in there. A wide array of different primers and ammunition types all did great in this. Okay, and again, as I mentioned, this trigger looks like an orgy in in Dubai. Okay, it has performed filthy, muddy, torture tests, all kinds of different stuff that hopefully you'll see in the B-roll if we didn't have any data corruption. This trigger has just pushed through it. Now, I will say there was 17 to 20 dead primers, okay, in this last class I took. I ordered a 1,000-round lot from Wolf, and when you see that B-roll, you're going to see me doing a quick, immediate action, you know, and you're not going to see me do the tap, but you're going to see me do the quick rack and then getting back into it. You're going to see that B-roll. The reason that I was having to do that is because of the dead primers. I already knew at that point that that was what was going on. I would walk over there, I'd pick them up, and as you'll see in the pictures, there is a very positive indent on that primer. This hammer, with its full-powered springs, was going forward just like how it should. The only problem was those primers were dead, so I do not fault this trigger at all. That would happen to any trigger. But that's the track record. Absolutely 100% reliable, 100% dependable. There was never any time to where this trigger gave me an issue, even when I caked this thing full of, you know, muck. So there is that. It's a very dependable trigger. All right, so we're going to quickly show, before I get into the final conclusions, how this trigger actually feels. Okay, so obviously when it's on safe, it's not going to work. I put it on safe. There is no definable take up at all. I mean, you're essentially right at the wall. This is a single stage trigger. Right there, boom. All right, so that's how much you have in terms of actually breaking that wall. If you could picture putting your fist on a tank as Superman, but the tank can't move, and then you just push through it. That's exactly how that feels. So you got a very stiff wall, very definable, but then as soon as you add that pressure, boom, it breaks. It is extremely clean. This is actually my favorite trigger to date in terms of how it feels. Obviously, I have the negative about the pins, but the way that that break is, it is extremely pleasant. All right, so here's your reset. You do have a little bit of wiggle here, right? Oh, there it goes. So you do have a little bit of wiggle here. All right, that's about how much. But that spring is so powerful, it wants to shoot your finger back forward, okay? All right, so I've got that little bit of wiggle. I'm actually having a lot of trouble keeping it within right there because that spring is so powerful. So here's what it is, full speed, all right? A little bit longer than a Geisley, right? But it is stronger on that reset. So you've got the pros and cons there. All right, so, and then we'll do it full speed, reset, boom, reset, boom. So, oh, also, real quick, this trigger, even after the hammer has been dropped, you can still put it on safe, okay? There you go. All right, so final conclusions. Trigger was sent to us. Obviously, y'all could say there's a little bit of bias there, but we're trying to keep it as objective as possible. There's certainly other things that other triggers do a little bit better than this one. So as acknowledged, the Geisley has a shorter reset. I forget which model it is. They have ADHD numbering and labeling and all that other stuff. We'll put the asterisk in there to what model I'm specifically referring to. But the reset is a little bit longer. Now, the reset power going forward is stronger, okay? That is essentially the only thing that I could think that's better with another trigger is the fact that it does have a shorter reset, but I think it kind of makes up for it with how strong. I mean, seriously, guys, you got to feel it to know what I'm talking about. It is shooting your finger forward on that. Very easy to get behind this trigger and get behind it quick. So there is that. It's by far my favorite trigger when it comes to how it actually feels to operate. I mean, the way that it breaks, how immediate you are at that wall, just everything about it, right? And the track record really showed me like, okay, their advertising is true when it comes to this component trigger. Their drop-ins, we have another video on, and you know, we don't have a lot of experience with those yet, so we're still trying to build on that. But in terms of this component trigger, this is phenomenal. I'm a huge fan. The only con would be the pins. Again, they're not anti-rotational, but they are anti-walk. That is proprietary. I'm not a fan of proprietary in general, but I do think that some of the complaints are a little overblown. So you as the consumer can do with that what you will and what you want. But do I recommend this trigger? 100%. Right? If you're willing to deal with those pins as the only negative, this trigger really, in my eyes, can't be beat. 2/3 of the Boys Against NATO project, they feel separately, right? And whenever they release their videos on their favorite trigger, that's one thing. But in terms of my eyes, this trigger can't be beat in terms of actual operation, actual use, actual feel. So, again, thank you for coming to check the video out. I know that this has been, it's kind of hard to put a very detailed video on triggers because they're so simple, but this one is a little bit different because of proprietary nature and things of the sort. So we tried to be as in-depth as possible and really test this thing out to the best of our ability. Before I go, get some training, you know, listen to the Joe Rogan podcast, eat your fruits and vegetables, and obviously eat a hell of a lot of meat, and get training. The number one group that I'm going to recommend, that's going to be Blake Flannery with Maneuver Training Solutions. Definitely can't recommend that guy enough. That's where this patch comes from. Our posts do not directly reflect his views. I think I need to say that in there because we're a little spicy sometimes. But yeah, definitely check those guys out, get some training, and then you can get gear like this and then figure out like, hey, is it worth a shit or not? Am I good with it or not? So there's that, guys. Y'all have a good one. Say bye to the mullet. Love you guys. Out early.
What are you saying?
Huh?
What did you say?
Oh, I was saying that Hamilton's a bitch because he fired off them laws early, dude. I was supposed to be out of the wadi by the time he fired them off, not in the wadi. Anyway.
What does that even mean?
They had an internal base fire about 3 feet up from where I was at, and I was in the fucking wadi, and they were supposed to wait until we fucking left the wadi so we could start pushing and they could shift their fields of fire. And then what happened is, instead of that, they decided, fuck it, full send, poof, 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 like 5 rockets at once, blew my fucking eardrums all the way out in that wadi. Fuck dick.
Is that why you can't hear?
It's one of the reasons, yeah. It's one of the fucking reasons, yeah. Fucking dickhead.
Okay.